What's your "I can't believe they were doing that at work" story? Every Wednesday, there was a tamale lady that would walk local businesses selling her tamales. My boss had a bit of a fixation with them because he would buy a dozen or more weekly. One day, she tells him that she is moving and thanks him for his business. Well, he offered her $500 to teach him how to make them. Next day, she comes in with her husband. We have a tamale making class, and it was one of the weirdest but fun moments I've ever had. Well, sounds like a $500 well spent. Some of the best tamales come from the back of a tamale lady's van. We all know that. Their boss was a smart man. Story 2. I worked at a job where this woman, a few cubicles over, had a tragic weekend. Her husband passed away while napping on the couch, and she had to deal with that circus. And now on Monday, she was on the phone making calls and sobbing hysterically. Funeral homes, family members, insurance companies, the hospital, the morgue, and so on. All the crap you have to manage when a spouse passes away unexpectedly. A few of us reported to management, but her manager said she only gets 3 days of bereavement as per policy, and she already took those when her mother passed away at the beginning of the year. She is also out of sick days, which she took because her kids were sick. Nothing I can do. It's an HR mandate. If she didn't come in this morning, I would have been forced to write her up. God dang. Story 3. I got my first manager job, IT. I was really excited. I was going to mentor and hold the youngins. I'd taken business management classes, conflict resolution classes, mentoring workshops. I had binders. I was ready to go. First day, first task. Jimmy is one of your direct reports. You need to get him to stop cutting his toenails at his desk. Story 4. I used to work at a bank, and every morning the businesses would file in to drop off their morning deposit bags. And it was always the same 9 to 10 businesses, so I'd see the same employees day after day, and I'd make small talk while I counted the deposit for them. One of these places was a tile shop, just a massive retail warehouse of tons of different tiles for your kitchen, bathroom, etc. One day, the normal guy I joke around with is gone. The backup guy looks somber and nervous. The next day, he's also gone, and it's a totally new person. So I start making small talk, and me and this new guy start becoming friendly. After about a month of this, I finally asked what happened to the other guys. Turns out that their manager and a bunch of his underlings were opening up the warehouse after closing hours and renting the space out to a corn studio. It was discovered when one of their customers recognized the tiled kitchen set in the background of the corn and took screenshots to send to corporate. Corporate came in and rained holy hell down on them and fired like half of the staff and brought in management from elsewhere to cover. Story 5. Fast food in the 90s. Our best drive-thru worker would sell grass through the drive-thru window. There were still some small orders. He'd tell them the total was $21.07 instead of $1.07. I thought it was kind of brilliant. No one would accidentally be cool with paying $20 for a 99-cent Whopper. Another guy brought acid to work on New Year's Eve. I heard the manager tell him to just wait until after closing, midnight. Around 9 p.m., he calls for manager help. I heard him insisting he couldn't get the milkshakes because the machine kept melting. Story 6. Someone had been making mini bottles of fireballs and then flushing the empty bottles down the toilet. We got an email one day about how the sewage pumping station for our campus broke down and they cleared out hundreds of mini bottles of fireball. That email ended with something to the effect of, "Whoever is doing this, we don't want to punish you, we want you to get help." There was also the time someone discovered a bag full of feeder mice in the backroom freezer. Story 7. I was working in a skyscraper at an investment firm. If you've ever been downtown Boston, you've walked by it. So one of the dock workers who also worked the elevator apparently was also a pretty big dealer. So he was getting a couple of bricks sent to him from somewhere, but was afraid of having them sent to his house lest they be stolen while he was at work. So he had the brilliant idea of having them sent to him at work. It was a lot of grass. How do you even hide the smell? Simple. They boxed the grass and put a powdered dish detergent in the box with it. I mean, like a layer of it. They boxed the grass, put that in a box, and then covered it. Well, so the story goes, one side of the box got banged up during transit, and lo and behold, a very small hole opens in the box and out flows a white powder. Remember how we were in downtown Boston at a skyscraper? Yep, so it's treated as a potential biochemical attack. Building is locked down, bomb squad and chemical experts come in. And not only do they find it's just dish detergent, but it's to hide pounds of grass, and he was dumb enough to address it to himself. I assume the guy is still in jail. LOL. Story 8. I've seen some crazy things at work. A manager was sleeping with a couple of employees. A new manager comes along and they start fooling around. They get caught, he gets fired, and now they're married. Another employee found a substance and decided to take it on the clock, freaks out, hides in a closet, and gets fished out by an ambulance. He got fired. A supervisor decided to smoke grass in various places. He was fired. A supervisor started sleeping with a new employee, would deny it, but was caught multiple times and was promoted to manager. An employee would sell substances to patrons. I think he still works there. Story 9. At my old job, a coworker got fired but refused to leave the building. Instead of making a scene, he calmly walked into the break room, popped a bag of popcorn in the microwave, and sat down at his desk like nothing happened. Security was called, and while they were trying to escort him out, the microwave caught fire because he set the timer for 20 minutes instead of 2. So now the office smelled like burnt popcorn, the fire alarm was blaring, and this guy just grabbed his half-burnt bag and walked out like it was all part of the plan. Still not sure if it was a meltdown or the most legendary exit ever. Well, talk about a popular exit. I know, I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. But he really did bring the heat to his farewell, didn't he? Story 10. At a previous IT job, I helped the site safety and security guy install cameras. Once they went live, we had to monitor them for a few days to see if there were any issues. We had 2 employees that were dating and working on different production lines. We watched on a camera in the hall as the guy went into the bathroom, and about 30 seconds later, his girlfriend came from another section of the building and joined him. About 5 minutes later, she goes sprinting out of the bathroom, and he comes out a second or 2 later, fastening his belt. About 2 minutes later, water starts pouring out from under the door. We run down to investigate the water and call facilities who meet us. There was a sink broken off the wall, water going everywhere, and a rubber wrapper on the floor. Couple gets called into the office, and the guy confesses to everything. And he takes full blame so his girlfriend wouldn't get fired. We knew what they were doing. Story 11. I used to work at a place that was a fever dream. A few stories from there because I don't have the time. We started every Friday with a full company huddle, around 30 people. Occasionally, the boss man wanted to prove how cool and hip he was and would come in a costume. One day, the CEO and his right-hand man came down in full over-the-shoulder mankinis with a speaker on their shoulder and ran around messing with all the dudes there. They left the women alone while dressed like that at least, then continued on for the full 30 minutes dressed like that. Different day, same whole company meeting, boss man learned one of the ladies had never shotgunned a beer and he was like, "Oh, you have to do it now. Anyone else wants to join? She can't do it alone, so like 6 people shotgun beer at 8:15 in the morning." There were some perks, but it was largely hell. One time he took the whole company to drive on a racetrack. That is still one of the most fun things I've ever done though. Well, sounds like car dealership shenanigans. Story 12. Nurse here, a postpartum nurse at a large hospital in Minneapolis, was in charge of making sure mothers after giving birth, not normal births, high risks, and C-sections, were treated with pain medications. She was drawing the liquid med into syringes, filling other syringes with tap water, and filling the med bottles back up with water. Then she would go into the bathroom and inject herself and then go see her patients. Thank you to cameras and the Fixis machine she was caught on. Story 13. When I was pushing carts at a Costco in the early 2000s, one of the other cart guys would show up, clock in, go get in his car, and then leave. He would come back to show up for all his breaks and lunches, but would leave again right after. I told our supervisor. She came out and watched him do it every day he worked for a week, and then reported him to our manager. The next time I came in, she tells me to not worry about it, don't bring it up again, because it turns out that guy was selling grass to our manager at a discount for the job. The warehouse manager there also hired a new assistant warehouse manager who many believe was his affair partner. The lady was dumb as bricks and failed at every task she was given, but she kept winning the unofficial employee of the month. Apparently, there was one time the WM's wife came in to surprise him with lunch while his mistress was whistling him under his desk. Supposedly, one of the supervisors came in to ask him a question while they were eating and saw the AWM shoes peeking out in the divide between the desk bottom and floor. I worked at a pizza place before Costco where the owner hired her sister to be the closing manager, but her role was pretty much just be the legal adult around while the teenagers do all the work. One time after leaving, I realized I had forgotten my paycheck, so I went back to get it, and the sister was fooling around with some dude who wasn't her husband on the prep table in the back. At my next shift, I was apparently being very avoidant of her, so my friend asked me what the deal was. I told him what I saw, and he told me a similar story but with a different guy. After a while, the sister stopped showing up. We asked the owner what happened, and she said apparently she was hustling herself here to make some extra cash since she knew her husband would never come around. The owner revealed she didn't care about the hustling and cheating. Apparently, her sister had always been that way, but she was upset she was doing it in her store and on the prep tables. I guess she forgot to clean up after one night and left the used rubber on the prep table. Story 14. Toys R Us was one of my first jobs when I was a teenager. Used to work with this metalhead guy who was probably about 5 years older than me. He used to regularly show up intoxicated to supervise a warehouse, operate the forklift and compactor, etc. They didn't want to sack him because he was one of the only people there who knew what they were doing. Also, used to have intimacy with his coworker girlfriend in the customer toilets. He was funny as heck, cool guy, fell out of touch with him after a while as you do. Last I heard, he worked as a Captain Jack Sparrow impersonator. Story 15. Worked at a bar, manager was MIA at closing, which usually meant he passed out upstairs after drinking through the whole shift. Office door was locked and there was no answer, so we kicked open the door and there he was, corn on the screen, and he had passed out into substances he had laid out on the desk. Oh, and the safe was left unlocked. We got him up, but he was still messed up, substances stuck to his face. It was 6 a.m. and we wanted to go home, so we called the owner to come deal with him. Us reporting his mistreatment didn't seem to faze the owner, but having to come in at 6 a.m. to deal with him and close up the bar did the trick. Never saw him again. Story 16. I was a management consultant working for a very large insurance company. 3-letter name, was big in the news in the 2008 financial crisis. We were there late one night when my colleague went to grab something off of the shared printer, only to find a bunch of color prints of a very hardcore man-on-man action. Interesting choice of things to print at work. Story 17. Twofold story here. I can't believe they did that at work, and I can't believe the company did that. One of the guys at my job was a technician in charge of equipment and maintenance. He would steal mobile equipment and resell it on eBay, mobile meaning it had no assigned home, so it could be used by anyone who needed it. It took months, possibly years, to discover he was stealing stuff because it was just assumed that someone misplaced what he had been stealing. He was only caught because he never removed our company's asset labels and a manager saw one of his eBay listings for a piece of missing equipment. After firing the technician, the company started lawsuits because they realized he stole around $100K over his time there. But people who knew this tech at that time told me the company's lawyers refused to cut any deal and wanted to drag the process out to press to continue suing until they got all their money back. They wanted to make an example of him and keep him buried in lawsuits and lawyers' fees. The tech was now unemployed, in debt from lawyers, and was constantly in and out of court. He took his life 2 years after he was fired, still overwhelmed with the lawsuits and seeing no way out. The company retells this story during every new hire orientation, leaving out the lawsuits from the story. It's something I had to warn multiple new employees to not mention the guy who stole the equipment, because during orientation it's treated as a joke about an employee who stole from the company, so we fired him. I talked with the trainers who told me the higher-ups required them to mention that story and a separate story about following safety protocols and a guy who got injured. Story 18. This was a good 10 years or so ago. After an altercation occurred in the store that I worked at, not related to the below, the police came to examine CCTV footage. Whilst reviewing the footage for the altercation, it also revealed an affair between the assistant manager and a co-worker in the storage area. They were both married with kids that ended up losing their jobs. Imagine being caught in the act by the police and your co-workers on CCTV, then having to explain to your partner why you've been sacked from work. As far as I'm aware, they both got divorced and tried to make a go of it together, but the relationship lasted all of 3 months. Story 19. Was hired as kitchen manager at a new place in town. They had been open 2 weeks, just winging it with a fella who convinced them he knew what he was doing. Day 1, I threw away tons of open cans of moldy food, no coverings, no proper storage at all. Okay. Then I look at the grill, like really look at it. Underneath is a very deep pool of sludge. Deep. I say to this man, we'll call him Batman. I say to him, Batman, what are you doing with the grease at night after you've cleaned the grill? This grown man says, it goes to the grease pit outside. I then ask, Batman, how is it getting to the grease pit outside? He says, it just goes there. And that day, that man cleaned a 90-year-old cast iron griddle and carried a lot of grease to the pit. It leaked goo for about 2 weeks. This thing was huge and had 2 weeks worth of grease in it. Story 20. Lol, my first 2 internships involved a boss or a close-by coworker cheating at work with someone else in the department. In both cases, the women felt the need to talk to me about it. No one was making a move on me. It was a guilt and crying kind of thing. I think in both cases, it was because they'd been so brazen with the cheating that their full-time coworkers were a bit offended or felt disrespected. One of them would have noisy intimacy in a conference room. Like, who does that? What a way to be introduced into the working world. Story 21. Former high school teacher, one of my colleagues' department would send his TAs, 16 and 17-year-olds, on errands during his class. They'd make coffee runs, get him lunch, take his car to get it washed, and do other totally inappropriate tasks off campus. He was finally fired after it was discovered he had sent a girl to some random person's house to pick up something he bought on Craigslist. That whole school was a crap show. It was a small, conservative town where people covered for each other because they all grew up together and they all had dirt on one another. I have a million stories, but this is the only one where the person faced consequences. Story 22. Older guy left his paraphernalia in the bathroom by accident. That is how we found out he was using during the day. Another employee found it when he went in after him and had to tell the boss. They reviewed the cameras and saw he went in before. We had a field day at work and we're all outside playing football. Guy was in his 50s, just outrunning everyone, all the younger guys who were in their early 20s. Was also a great worker and always super fast. Well, now it all made sense. Another job, there was this really lazy guy who really did nothing. He was on the outside crew but never worked and would always just complain. One day, he just decided he's going to smoke inside to de-stress. Just loads it up and almost goes to light it, but someone stopped him. Apparently, he would do that on job sites too. Also, would steal everyone's food and drinks. One guy finally caught him in the act of stealing a Gatorade and poured it over his head in front of everyone. Guy flipped out and finally left after that, lol. Story 23. Worked part-time afternoons in a warehouse. Full-time guy was never around when I clocked in. Still being in high school, I just assumed all the work was mine and did it, with him showing up later in my shift. He was also arrogant, complaining about my work and generally being a schmuck. The roughed-in office in the same warehouse had a rat in the ceiling, so I got picked to find it. Found a bed, a TV, corn video, and magazines. Right to the manager I went, told him I found something unusual and he needs to see it. Up the ladder he went, saw what I saw and came down angry. Called a meeting and proceeded to throw it all down. Guy got fired 2 weeks before retirement. Story 24. Summer camp counselor. I'd grown up going to this camp before getting on staff, and I'd come through the CIT program, so even though it was my first year on staff, I knew the management really well and all of the policies. We also had a first-year guy on staff who took the job as a reprieve while he was motorcycling around the country. This guy was generally really disinvolved, letting his campers run a little too loose. For instance, we were really strict about the buddy system, but it wasn't uncommon to find one of his campers a bit further off than they should be. One of the specific things we got trained on was what to do if a camper had an accident and needed something cleaned in the camp laundry. Specifically, keep it discreet, get it washed, and return privately. One of his boys apparently pooped his pants, and instead of following this very clearly communicated and explained scenario that we discussed extensively during training, he proceeded to have a ceremonial parade of the crap pants through his cabin unit with all of the campers in tow, which culminated in a ceremonial burning of the pants in the unit fire pit. Apparently, the smell was horrendous. Anyway, as soon as this hit the ears of the directors, because 10-year-old boys were absolutely going to tell everyone this happened, he was escorted to pack his things and get off the property ASAP. To this day, 13 years later, I have no clue how he took "this is a sensitive issue for kids, so be discreet and private about it" as hold a ceremonial grand burning of the poop pans for all his peers to participate in. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 25. Back in the mid-1990s, in the very early days of the internet, we had a colleague who would sit at his desk with 2 or 3 windows open, streaming corn on his screen in the office in an open-plan office building. Again, this was in the 1990s. Another colleague would smoke cigars at his desk in an open-plan office building. A couple of years before that, we had one colleague who didn't show up to work on Monday or Tuesday. We asked our manager if he had called in sick. Apparently no, he was in jail for dealing. I never saw him again. Story 26. I used to work in local TV news. We had a photographer who, aside from already having some strikes against him, did 3 things in 1 week that led to his immediate firing. Was sent to cover a tattoo convention. Yeah, insert slow Newsday jokes here. But this is where the madness begins. Someone in our newsroom learned that he managed to score a free tattoo in exchange for featuring a particular artist more prominently in the video we were going to air later that day. Huge ethical news no-no. He met a young lady at said convention and traded phone numbers. I guess he went from 0 to creeper real quick because he sent her Johnson pics that were clearly unwanted. She blasted the photos out on social media. I'm talking about everywhere. The pictures, as it turned out, were taken in our station's bathroom. When our news director questioned him, he made up this ridiculous lie and said, "I asked my mom to decorate our home bathroom like the station's because I liked it so much." Cute facepalm. He was secretly working on a local politician's re-election campaign and was caught printing flyers and other material on our newsroom printers. Obviously, another ethical breach. I am cackling to myself as I write this all out. What a trifecta. It will live in newsroom infamy. So yeah, needless to say, he was let go. If anyone is wondering about his other strikes, he got into several car accidents in our marked news cars where he was found at fault. At one point, I think he was suspended from driving the news cars and reporters had to drive him instead of vice versa. He would also disappear for hours at a time and there were many red flags that he was on substances while at work. Story 27. One of my coworkers' office job got caught on one of those to catch a predator type shows. He was doing video calls and messaging who he thought was a young girl at work on his work computer. He downloaded Omegle on it and everything. He was pretty sure he had to use his work laptop because he wasn't allowed to have any personal electronics at home or social media because he'd cheated on his wife before, allegedly. He'd reserve meeting rooms to have video calls with the girl, send her pics of his view from his desk, take selfies in the work bathroom, etc. Oh, and did I mention that his wife also worked at the company on the same team as him? Our bosses ended up finding out about all of this because she and he went into a meeting with them and asked if he could have 6 months leave from work to go to jail for it all. They obviously let him go after that. The episode didn't come out until around 1.5 months after he was let go, and that's when we all, besides management, found out about what happened. The way they found his identity and caught him on the show is because he sent the girl a selfie with his work badge laying on the counter. So they went to our company's LinkedIn and scrolled through all of us until they found his wife, looked at her Facebook, and found photos of him. Story 28. My second deployment to Iraq during the war was a weird experience for me because I was on active duty and was assigned to a reservist battalion because they were shorthanded on medics. I never knew this was a thing and always thought active duty personnel stayed with active duty units and reserve personnel were always part of reserve units. But things were chaotic at the time, and after the invasion, it became apparent that the Army in general was understaffed. They were calling up the IIR for Christ's sake. So here I was, a full-time soldier who had already deployed during the invasion, assigned to a unit of weekend warriors from down south. For the most part, it was fine since most of the NCOs and officers were former active duty. While I saw tons of crazy crap on that deployment, the incident that fits this question involved 2 soldiers in the HQ company fooling around. Up to that point, I had mostly done medic work for infantry or CAB units, so I maybe worked with 2 or 3 female soldiers in an entire company, and they worked in support roles like mechanics or clerks. Anyway, they got caught fooling around somewhere, and the battalion commander called them out in front of the entire battalion that was on post and made the dude call his wife and tell her what he did, like in front of all of us. This was 2005-ish, so there were no cell phones that could make international phone calls like today. So the colonel had a desktop phone with a super long phone cord brought from the command tent, and the dude stood in front of all of us and called his wife to say he was cheating on her. Dude was crying, and you could tell he was trying to figure out how to clean it up, but the CEO wasn't having it and told him to stop making excuses. Crap was cringe as heck, and I've never seen anything like that before or since. So yeah, the reserves hit differently, I guess. Also, I have no idea if anyone else cheated for the rest of that deployment, but I'll say I never stood in a formation watching another person call their spouse to confess. Story 29. We had to hire the substance-enjoying DJ's son of the showroom manager when he moved to town. He did not excel at warehouse work. Managing his attention was wildly tough, and he was frequently out with food poisoning. He'd buy large packs of lunch meats from the wholesale place across the street but never refrigerate them. One time, he bought samurai swords online but had them shipped to the warehouse because he was worried about what his degenerate roommates would do if the swords came and he wasn't home. I was out for lunch when they arrived and walked back in to see another employee tossing boxes full of product up into the air for DJ to try to slice in half. Spoiler, he luckily got ripped off with crappy dull swords. Story 30. I wish I was kidding. I had a coworker named Daryl who would build turd traps. Not sure if that's copyrighted because the maintenance guys made him angry so bad one time. He would construct almost like bird nest type structures out of rubber bands, paper clips, and pallet/skid broken wood fragments and hairnets and flush them. And all of the ingredients fit in his pockets, so he looked as normal as could be. Constant plumbing issues in the facility. Constant. Cameras were installed, but working 12-hour shifts, just about everyone uses the bathroom, so it was of no use. It was hysterical for us, honestly, but the company got mad after a while and he slowed down, but if he's having a bad day, expect a turd trap. Story 31. Warehouse manager worked 6 days a week because he needed the money, was regularly at raves, taking substances. Gee, I wonder why he needed the money. I got put to work on Saturday, which was a quiet day, just doing the basics to keep orders flowing. I walked in and he was so relieved he gave me a hug as I had been working there longer than he had. You know how to run this place without me, don't you? Yeah, I could. Why? I haven't slept, done substances all last night. I'm going to tell management I'm clearing a shelf for more storage downstairs. I'll be asleep, just leave me. If management gets nosy, wake me up. And that is exactly what happened. I just fell asleep on a wooden rack for about 2 hours. Story 32. I work in agriculture. In the summer, we take on temporary seasonal workers, including high school and college students. Some are great, some are god-awful. Two of these, belonging to the latter category, were confronted by a team lead for playing a homemade corn video in the break room. Some girl they knew doing, well, let's say, some kind of content. A somewhat inexperienced team lead notified them to stop immediately as their behavior was fireable. They argued with the lead that it wasn't corn, which made zero sense. On the way back to the field after lunch, they flipped off and pestered the team lead who confronted them, who then obviously reported them to us. They were fired without ceremony when they arrived back to the field, and we spent the rest of the day scratching our heads and laughing. Literally room temperature IQ on those fools. Story 33. I used to work with someone who spent most of the day running her own business from her office. Everyone knew about it, but nothing was done because she'd given one of the higher-ups a huge discount for the services of her other job. It caused several issues. One time, no one could find her during a major issue because she was with one of her personal clients when she claimed to have been at one of our clients' offices. Another time, I was printing up a report at the same time she'd printed up an invoice for her business. The invoice ended up in the middle of my report. I didn't catch it because I checked the first and last page when I grabbed it. I only discovered it after uploading it to our server, and someone called me about it when they read it. Had to deal with IT to get it removed so I could re-upload it. Our boss was livid, and I'm pretty sure she was the one who finally called the corporate office. She retired before they could fire her. Story 34. Worked at a private ICE prison in the medical ward. I came in at my normal 3 a.m. shift, and there was an inmate in holding that was not scheduled. I called the charge nurse at night and asked why he was in holding if he wasn't in a medical emergency. I was stonewalled and immediately got a call from the assistant warden to stay in my part of medical and lock down. About 10 minutes later, the entire prison's internal affairs and CO command shift came in. Apparently, the head nurse and medical lead for night shift, along with the CO commander, all females, were sitting in the medical lobby with handcuffs on. They had apparently been going to get a certain inmate and placing them in holding and essayed him continuously for about a month. They were all immediately removed from the prison and prosecuted, but these were people I worked with for almost 3 years. It was a heck of a shock. Story 35. Worked at a company notorious for micromanaging and creating daily Bibles for each position with hour-by-hour task descriptions, allowing others to step into the role during absence or because of the very high turnover rate. It wasn't a bad idea, just taken to an extreme. All passwords to devices and emails were included in that book, and we all knew if we were out, someone else would hop on because the work must go on. It almost always could wait. One person repeatedly called out, and I was annoyed because I was having to do her job on top of mine. One morning, she no-showed again, and I awoke her screen to find her Craigslist postings and emails setting up intimate work appointments for that day during business hours. Went to grab a pen and open her drawer, almost poking myself with used syringes. I'm not even any street work or substance use, but hide it better so I don't have to deal with the fallout, please. Story 36. As an intern, I was essayed by my supervisor. I fought like hell, but nobody came to help. I tried to call the police when I escaped, and the secretary forced the phone out of my hand. I lost my internship and scholarship to cover it up. A married client spent hours in the executive director's office with the door closed. One of my trainees thought it was a good idea to send me pics of his Johnson. As a temp, one of my coworkers literally spent 30 minutes outside smoking a cigarette, didn't come back on time, and was on personal calls all day long. She was so protected by the nepotism that I was hired just to fix her mistakes. Story 37. I worked at a convenience store in the mid-2000s. My manager was super chill. I could get beer on credit and just pay for it on payday. Everyone split any leftovers from the deli at the end of the night. It was a fun job. Then I started noticing things like my cash drawer or the safe count coming up short, and she would simply tell me not to worry about it. And a few days later, the safe or drawer count would be over. Turns out her and the assistant manager were using store money to buy substances, flip them, then return the money before making a weekly bank deposit. I'm not sure if they ever got caught. I left the job pretty soon after I found out what was happening. Story 38. When I was in college working fast food, we had a store that went through 4 managers in one summer. First manager yelled so much that the owners fired her, as in they got complaints about her yelling from customers who thought it was unacceptable. Second manager got fired because he would take all the high school-age boys out back with him on his smoke break and explain how to hide money during a divorce while making the girls run everything except the kitchen. Kitchen staff tended to be college students instead of high school, and he didn't like any college students. Third manager sprayed his legs with fryer grease to file a fake workman's comp claim. He was caught on video but accidentally admitted to taking money from the safe when he was asked to come in and discuss concerns with his actions. He had lied about having prior convictions. The owners called the cops but kind of let him run out of the back before the cops arrived. The fourth, I guess, was not actually lost over the summer, but when I came back the following summer, I was told that one of the managers had joined the owner's church and had gone to be good friends with them before asking for an advance of half a month's pay. She then just stopped showing up to work. So yeah, that was weird. I now work in engineering. One of the power plants I did work at had bicycles for people to move around the site. The trade apprentices would have races around the plant. Occasionally, they would get injured. I was only a year or two out of college at that time, and so these trade school apprentices tended to be just a couple of years younger than me, somewhere my age or older. It was kind of crazy to realize that I was 24 and responsible for the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and design when I was on-site engineering rep, and other people my age were being asked to just not injure themselves racing bicycles around an industrial site. Story 39. I worked in a state agency doing technical work. First week there, another worker told me, "Sure is nice to see another white guy working here." Yes, this is the South and he's white, but man. After I got let go for performance issues, totally related to him not helping the new guy and telling lies about me, I heard he got suddenly reassigned to a new location and was investigated for mistreatment at work. Yes, he got fired. How do you go home to your wife and teen girl and boy and tell them how you got fired? Story 40. Went to school with a guy for HVAC and got hired shortly after he started working for the same company. We weren't on different sides of the service, so I didn't see him much, but would run into at least once or twice a month. After some time, I stopped seeing him and found out later that he was terminated. Come to find out, he was keeping a map of all the bathrooms at project job sites, hospitals, offices, schools, and marking off the ones where he was relieving stress. Guess he was going for a 100% completion and got to a point where he bragged about it. Needless to say, got back to management and they were none too pleased. Story 41. Just general office culture in the early 2000s and before. Late 90s and early 2000s was the emergence of the internet and email communications. You had higher-ups that had little idea on how all the stuff worked, and you have a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, mostly men, manning the IT support teams. So naturally, the office culture was very uncontrolled. What sticks the most to my mind was we had this one guy that had a mailing list that anyone at work could join, and he would forward daily corn pictures or videos, all this on the corporate email and during working hours. And this went on for years, but as the company started to invest in its IT and the crowds grew up, all that stuff was nixed and clear policies were put in place. Story 42. My old boss literally lived to pester women who worked for him. He always kept it on the low, and really the only people who knew were the targets of his cruelty, 1 to 2 women at a time. It was a super small tech startup with less than 20 employees pretty much at all times, but had a decently high turnover rate. I got a warning from one of my female colleagues who quit because of him to keep my distance because he wasn't safe. I kept him at arm's length for about 5 months after that, and he got increasingly angry and threatening with me for refusing to engage him in anything other than work-related stuff. Eventually, because of him, I quit. I learned later from a different female colleague who he has since fired and who was literally suing him for wrongful termination that during work hours he would pester her for her attention and ask her for help picking out gifts for his wife. And then he would send her links which were basically corn. He would also frequently ask her questions about her intimate life with her husband and try to tell her about his. I guess stuff like this happened all the time to his victims. I'm just lucky as heck that my gray rockin' strategy worked as long as it did before I had to bail too. Not exactly lighthearted, but finding out the vile crap he was doing on company time was an added dose of horrifying. Story 43. My first job was making pizza. The manager, about 30 years old, married with kids, was fooling around with one of the in-store workers at work sometimes. He left pizza to become a cop, was planning to divorce his wife, told me he was waiting until he got his badge, then courts would give him whatever he wanted. My second job was in the Navy. The people who run nuclear power plants on submarines are intoxicated a good portion of the time. They bring liquor bottles with them. Sometimes they bring more than that. Management knows and doesn't care. They encourage fixations that keep you dependent on the Navy. I remember the chief of the boat and the engineering department master chief arguing one day. They can't start up the reactor intoxicated. Why not? That's what we do at Westpac. Naval Reactors, the organization that supervises everything, doesn't ask questions. Our ship's chief of the boat regularly showed up to work intoxicated, having driven himself to work. Topside watches repeatedly complained to leadership that he reeked of alcohol in the mornings. The people who complained were threatened with demotion and jail time. The chiefs also falsified all of their fitness test results, and my roommates and I were threatened with jail time for running faster than them. Grad school, I reported my advisor for falsifying results and financial fraud and for conducting experiments that risked significant bodily harm without any waivers, without IRB approval, over the open objections of the students in the lab because the students had not yet finished implementing their own safety features. University ignored it completely and gave the prof tenure. I've also worked at a lot of tech startups, and they've actually been the most open and honest and least sleazy so far, and they're not perfect. Story 44. I was at this house when this lawn supervisor was there on a sprinkler maintenance job, and he started working on a Finlay sprinkler head with a Langstorm 7-inch gangly wrench. Just then, this little apprentice leaned over and said, "You can't work on a Finlay sprinkler head with a Langstorm 7-inch wrench." Well, this infuriated the supervisor, so he went and got a volume 14 of the Kinsley manual, and he reads to him and says, "A Langstorm 7-inch wrench can be used with a Finlay sprocket." Just then, the little apprentice leaned over and said, "It says sprocket, not socket." I couldn't believe it. Story 45. Probably on the lower end of crazy, but at a previous job, there was a bay door leading out into a yard where they kept the empty big cable reels. Once outside the door, to your right and in front of you are walls. Turn left and it opens up into the yard. Well, apparently about 6 people from one of the night shifts had a communal stash of grass out there on the ledge formed by the bricks in the wall at least about waist height. They would take turns going out to smoke throughout the night, while they somehow didn't notice a camera pointed directly at them about 20 feet up diagonally from where they were smoking. One of the people fired was the night shift supervisor for that shift. It still baffles me to this day, honestly. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.